In the grand theater of galactic politics, the hegemony had been playing the same tired role for 3,000 years, the unstoppable force that everyone else had the good sense not to test. Their empire stretched across 47 star systems, each one a testament to the simple philosophy that bigger ships, louder threats, and more bureaucratic paperwork could solve any diplomatic disagreement. The hegemony's dreadnoughts were the size of small moons, bristling with enough firepower to crack planets and sporting enough administrative offices to process the surrender documents of entire species before lunch. The capital ship Dominion's Fist alone housed 14 different departments dedicated to the proper filing of Conquest reports. Its command bridge could accommodate the egos of 50 different alien species, each convinced they were the hegemony's most valuable contributors while secretly plotting to become the hegemony's most valuable leaders. The ship's main cannon had been nicknamed the Debate Ender by its crew, though in 3 millennia of service, most conflicts had been resolved by the simple act of parking it in orbit above contested worlds. So when the communication arrays across the hegemony fleet began chirping with an incoming transmission from something calling itself a human diplomatic vessel, the reaction was about what you'd expect from a civilization that had grown comfortable with the universe bending over backwards to accommodate their lunch schedule. The source of this transmission was, by any reasonable galactic standard, adorable. The human ship measured roughly the length of a hegemony escape pod and possessed all the threatening presence of a particularly ambitious paperclip. Its hull appeared to be constructed from materials that most civilized species had abandoned around the time they discovered fire, and its energy signature suggested it was powered by what could charitably be described as controlled optimism. Admiral Vex, a towering specimen of the Corthani species, whose natural armor plating had been enhanced with enough ceremonial spikes to make sitting down a tactical challenge, regarded the readings with the sort of bemused contempt typically reserved for wayward asteroids that had wandered into shipping lanes. His 6 eyes, each adapted for tracking prey across the methane storms of his homeworld, focused on the tactical display with predatory interest. "Let me ensure I understand this correctly," the Admiral rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent centuries perfecting the art of sounding disappointed in the universe's life choices. "A species we've never heard of, flying in a vessel that wouldn't qualify as adequate space debris, is requesting an audience with the hegemony high command." The bridge erupted in what passed for laughter among 17 different species, though the resulting cacophony sounded more like a zoo experiencing a collective nervous breakdown. The Zelthani delegate, whose crystalline features reflected light in patterns that typically indicated either deep contemplation or severe indigestion, chimed in with harmonics that translated roughly to amused condescension. "Admiral, our xenological databases indicate these humans achieved basic fusion power approximately 2 standard centuries ago. By our calculations, they should barely be capable of reaching their own system's outer planets, let alone crossing interstellar space." The Moravian trade representative, a gelatinous entity that communicated through controlled biochemical emissions, added its own assessment with what could only be described as olfactory smugness. The translation matrix rendered its contribution as "their ship's propulsion system appears to be based on principles our species mastered before developing written language." How refreshingly primitive. What made this particularly amusing to everyone present was the humans' apparent belief that showing up uninvited to the galaxy's most exclusive military demonstration constituted proper diplomatic protocol. The Fifth Armada had been conducting routine intimidation exercises in the Kepler 442 system, a standard bit of saber-rattling designed to remind neighboring civilizations why paying their hegemony protection fees was such a sensible life choice. 237 vessels of various sizes, each one capable of reducing a planet to its component atoms, had been engaged in formation flying that doubled as a practical seminar in the inadvisability of disappointing the hegemony. And into this display of overwhelming force, a single human ship had arrived with the sort of casual confidence typically associated with individuals who were either supremely enlightened or completely insane. The fact that they had somehow managed to locate and approach the fleet without triggering any of the hegemony's early warning systems was being diplomatically overlooked in favor of focusing on the entertainment value of the situation. Admiral Vexthak made the sort of decision that had served the hegemony well for millennia. When faced with something new and potentially amusing, why not turn it into an object lesson for the rest of the galaxy? "Communications, open a channel to all fleet vessels," he commanded, his mandibles clicking in anticipation. Inform them that we have an opportunity to demonstrate proper galactic etiquette to a species that seems to have missed the orientation briefing. Have all ships assume attack formation Alpha 7. Let's give our uninvited guests a proper welcome. The universe, it seemed, was about to provide the hegemony with yet another addition to their collection of conquest stories. After all, what could possibly go wrong when dealing with a species whose most impressive achievement was successfully leaving their home system without accidentally destroying themselves in the process? As tactical displays across the fleet began updating with targeting solutions, nobody seemed particularly interested in questioning why a primitive species would approach the galaxy's most formidable military force with such apparent confidence. Sometimes the universe's best jokes are the ones that take a while to deliver their punchlines. The human response to being surrounded by enough firepower to sterilize a solar system was, by any reasonable standard of galactic diplomacy, either impressively serene or clinically insane. Their transmission arrived with the sort of polite punctuality that suggested they had either completely misunderstood the situation or possessed a sense of humor that operated on frequencies beyond normal comprehension. Greetings, Hegemony Representative. We appreciate your prompt response to our diplomatic request. The human delegation is prepared to discuss terms of mutual cooperation at your earliest convenience. The bridge of Dominion's fist fell silent with the sort of stunned quiet typically reserved for moments when the universe revealed it had been playing an entirely different game than everyone assumed. Admiral Vexthak's 6 eyes performed an involuntary recalibration sequence, as if hoping that proper focus might reveal the punchline to whatever cosmic joke was unfolding. Terms of cooperation. The Admiral's voice carried the bewildered tone of someone who had just been offered a partnership by his lunch. They do realize they're currently occupying the center of a tactical formation designed to demonstrate the inadvisability of existing without proper authorization. The Hegemony's diplomatic corps, a collection of species whose primary qualification was the ability to make surrender sound like a privilege, quickly assembled what they generously termed a negotiation panel. The Vorthak delegate, whose species had perfected the art of condescension to such a degree that they required special permits to engage in casual conversation, took point on the proceeding. Unknown human vessel, the Vorthak representative began, his words dripping with the sort of patronizing patience typically reserved for explaining basic concepts to particularly slow houseplants. Perhaps there has been some misunderstanding regarding your current tactical situation. You appear to have wandered into a restricted military zone during active exercises. We're aware of your ongoing operations, came the human reply, delivered with the sort of casual acknowledgement one might use when commenting on the weather. Our proposal involves the peaceful integration of human territories into galactic commerce networks, along with technology sharing agreements that could benefit all participating civilizations. The response triggered what diplomatic historians would later classify as the Great Galactic Giggle of 2030. The Zelthani delegate's crystalline structure resonated with harmonics that roughly translated to adorably optimistic, while the Moravian representative released biochemical compounds that the translation matrix rendered as charmingly delusional. The Kefrian military attaché, whose species had built their entire civilization around the principle that might makes right and everything else makes excellent target practice, decided to provide what they considered helpful clarification. Primitive species. The attaché announced with the sort of helpful tone typically used when explaining fire safety to combustible materials. Your vessel measures approximately 47 meters in length, and appears to be constructed primarily of refined metals that our civilizations abandoned, approximately 2,000 years ago. Our smallest escort frigate could accommodate your entire ship in its shuttle. Perhaps you would benefit from a tactical assessment of your current situation. The tactical displays are blaggingly updated with detailed analyses of the human vessel, revealing specifications that would have been impressive during the early Bronze Age of most civilizations. The ship's power output registered at levels that most hegemony vessels used for their auxiliary lighting system. Its defensive capabilities appeared to consist primarily of what could charitably be described as wishful thinking, and its offensive armaments seemed designed for the sort of conflicts typically resolved through strongly worded letters. Your ship's main weapon system appears to generate approximately 0.03% of the energy output of our standard point defense turrets, continued the Kefri, warming to his subject with the enthusiasm of a professor explaining basic mathematics to someone who had just claimed that 2 plus 2 equaled orange. Your defensive shields operate on principles that our species mastered before achieving interplanetary travel. Your propulsion system appears to be powered by controlled chemical reactions that most civilizations use for recreational fireworks. The human response arrived with the same unflappable calm that was beginning to make several bridge officers wonder if their translation systems were malfunctioning. Thank you for the technical assessment. We've noted your fleet composition and capability. Quite impressive engineering across multiple technological paradigms. Are you prepared to hear our terms? Admiral Vexthak decided that the situation had moved beyond amusing and was approaching the sort of surreal territory where reality appeared to be taking an unauthorized coffee break. The tactical situation was clear. One primitive vessel surrounded by the concentrated military might of the galaxy's dominant civilization, requesting to dictate terms as if they held some sort of strategic advantage that everyone else had somehow missed. Very well, the Admiral announced, his voice carrying the sort of indulgent patience typically reserved for addressing particularly persistent children who insisted that their invisible friends deserved seats at the dinner table. The hegemony will hear your term. You have our undivided attention. Excellent. Human space currently encompasses 17 star systems with established colonies and industrial infrastructure. We propose a mutual non-aggression pact, establishment of trade routes, and technology exchange protocol. In return, we offer access to human innovations in several fields that might interest your civilizations. The silence that followed this pronouncement was the sort of profound quiet that occurs when the universe pauses to appreciate its own sense of humor. 17 star system. The humans claimed 17 star systems, when hegemony intelligence had classified them as a single system species that had barely achieved basic spaceflight. Perhaps, Admiral Vexthak said slowly, there has been some translation error. Our records indicate your species has achieved limited spaceflight capability within your home system. 17 colonies would represent a rather remarkable expansion for a primitive civilization. Our expansion has been efficient, came the human reply. We're prepared to provide coordinate data for verification, though we understand if you prefer to conduct your own reconnaissance. We're also prepared to demonstrate some of our technological capabilities, should you require proof of our claim. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in what his species considered deep contemplation, though the sound was virtually indistinguishable from the noise they made when preparing to devour something particularly crunchy. The hegemony appreciates your offer, he announced with the sort of formal courtesy typically reserved for addressing the recently deceased. However, we must decline your proposed term. Instead, we offer you 24 standard hours to surrender unconditionally and submit to hegemony authority. Failure to comply will result in the complete pacification of your vessel and all associated territory. We understand your position, the human representative replied with the same unperturbed calm that was beginning to make everyone distinctly uncomfortable. Before we respond, could you clarify your current fleet positioning? Our sensors are reading some interesting formation. The request struck everyone as charmingly pointless, rather like asking for directions while standing in the middle of a minefield. Still, there was something to be said for letting condemned species spend their final hours learning exactly how outmatched they were. Sometimes the universe's best lessons came with the most expensive tuition. The 24-hour deadline expired with the sort of anticlimactic punctuality that characterized most galactic ultimata. The human vessel remained exactly where it had been, floating in the center of the hegemony formation like a particularly stubborn piece of cosmic debris that had refused to read the eviction notice. Admiral Vexthak regarded this development with the weary resignation of someone who had spent millennia dealing with species that insisted on learning their lessons the hard way. All vessels, assume attack formation Beta Prime, the Admiral commanded, his voice carrying the sort of professional disappointment typically reserved for explaining basic physics to objects that were about to become physics demonstration. Prepare to demonstrate why ignoring hegemony deadlines is considered a career-limiting decision. The Fifth Armada's response was a thing of terrible beauty. 237 vessels arranged themselves in a perfect sphere of destruction, each ship's weapon systems cycling through targeting sequences with the methodical precision of a clockwork apocalypse. The formation had been refined over centuries of conflict into a geometric expression of the principle that resistance was not merely futile, but mathematically inadvisable.
The human ship's response to this overwhelming display of coordinated lethality was to politely request clarification on weapon configurations and targeting protocols. "This is fascinating tactical deployment," came the transmission, delivered with the sort of academic interest typically reserved for examining particularly well-preserved historical artifacts. "Could you provide specifications on your primary weapon system? Our analysis shows some innovative approaches to energy projection." The request struck the bridge crew as roughly equivalent to asking for the recipe while being served as the main course. Admiral Vexthak decided that the situation had progressed beyond educational and into the realm of therapeutic. Sometimes the universe's most troubled children required firm correction to understand their place in the cosmic hierarchy. "Weapons free," he announced. "All vessels demonstrate why curiosity without proper context is considered a learning disability." The opening salvo came from the escort frigate Inevitable Conclusion, whose captain had always possessed a flair for dramatic timing. A concentrated beam of coherent energy, capable of boring through planetary crusts like a cosmic dental drill, lanced out toward the human vessel with the sort of inexorable precision that had made the hegemony's reputation for thorough problem-solving. The beam struck the human ship's hull and produced results that could charitably be described as underwhelming. Instead of the expected spectacular disintegration, the energy discharge appeared to be absorbed, analyzed, and dismissed with all the ceremony of a particularly unimpressive sneeze. The human vessel's response was immediate and polite. "Thank you for the demonstration. Energy coherence patterns recorded and analyzed. Quite elegant engineering. Is this representative of your fleet's standard armament?" The silence that followed this inquiry was the sort of profound quiet that occurs when the universe pauses to reorganize its filing system. The Inevitable Conclusion's captain, a veteran of 43 campaigns who had never encountered anything that could survive his ship's main cannon, began running diagnostic sequences with the desperate enthusiasm of someone checking their instruments while reality appeared to be taking an unauthorized vacation. "Impossible," muttered the Kefrian military attaché, his tactical displays showing readings that violated several fundamental laws of physics, and at least 3 principles of common sense. That weapon discharge contained enough energy to vaporize a small moon. Their hull shouldn't exist anymore. Admiral Vexthak's 6 eyes focused on the tactical display with predatory intensity, watching as the human vessel's energy signature remained stubbornly unchanged. After 3 millennia of successful intimidation, he was experiencing the novel sensation of encountering something that had apparently missed the memo regarding proper victim etiquette. "All vessels, concentrate fire," he commanded. "Maximum intensity. Let's see how much educational enlightenment our primitive friends can absorb." What followed was a light show that would have been visible from neighboring star systems, as 37 different weapon technologies focused their attention on a single target with the coordinated enthusiasm of a cosmic firing squad. Plasma cannons, particle beams, gravity manipulators, and several devices whose function could only be described in languages that hadn't been invented yet, all directed their accumulated wisdom toward the tiny human vessel. The result was as spectacular as it was education. The human ship absorbed the concentrated firepower of most of a battle fleet with the casual efficiency of a particularly well-designed sponge, then responded with what could only be described as polite acknowledgement. "Weapons analysis complete. Thank you for the comprehensive demonstration. We've recorded 43 distinct energy projection methodologies and 17 different matter displacement techniques. Impressive technological diversity across your alliance." The transmission paused, and when it resumed, there was something different in its tone, a subtle shift that suggested the academic portion of the evening's entertainment was drawing to a close. "We believe we now have sufficient data to formulate an appropriate response. Please stand by." The human vessel's first retaliatory action was so subtle that several ships' sensor operators initially dismissed it as background radiation. A barely perceptible energy pulse, operating on frequencies that most civilizations used for interstellar communications, swept through the hegemony formation with all the apparent threat level of a particularly gentle cosmic breeze. What the pulse actually accomplished became apparent approximately 14 seconds later, when the dreadnought Manifest Destiny's primary weapon systems began targeting other hegemony vessels. The development struck everyone as sufficiently unexpected that the initial response was to assume equipment malfunction rather than enemy action. This assumption lasted roughly as long as it took for 16 more vessels to begin demonstrating similar targeting creativity. their weapon systems apparently having developed sudden and inexplicable interest in shooting anything that wasn't human. What in the name of the Great Void is happening? Admiral Vexthak demanded, watching as his tactical display updated with the sort of information that suggested reality had decided to experiment with surrealism. The answer came in the form of cascading system failures throughout the fleet, as ship after ship found their most advanced technologies turning against them with the enthusiastic efficiency of particularly well-informed revolution. Defensive shields collapsed. Navigation systems began providing directions to non-existent locations, and communication arrays started broadcasting poetry in languages that most species had been trying to forget. The human vessel's second transmission arrived with the timing of a perfectly delivered punchline. "We apologize for the demonstration, but your request for proof of our capabilities seemed genuine. As you can observe, our technological approach focuses on understanding and improving existing systems, rather than simply overwhelming them. Your fleet's performance parameters have been significantly enhanced, though perhaps not in the direction you were expecting." Admiral Vexthak watched his life's work systematically dismantling itself, and experienced the sort of philosophical revelation typically reserved for individuals who had just discovered that their understanding of fundamental reality had been incomplete. The humans hadn't brought superior firepower to the engagement, they had brought superior understanding of everyone else's firepower, and they were apparently just getting started. The complete systematic failure of the Fifth Armada proceeded with the methodical efficiency of a perfectly orchestrated symphony, if symphonies typically featured the screaming of fusion reactors and the melodic collapse of 3,000-year-old military doctrine. What had begun as a routine demonstration of galactic superiority had evolved into something resembling a masterclass in applied humility, taught by a species whose homework everyone had apparently failed to check. The human vessel's third transmission arrived as Admiral Vexthak watched his flagship's primary computer systems begin displaying what appeared to be improvement suggestions in 17 different languages, including several that the hegemony's xenolinguistic databases had classified as extinct. "We understand this situation may be somewhat unexpected," the human representative continued with the sort of helpful tone typically reserved for customer service representative, explaining why the warranty didn't cover acts of cosmic irony. "To clarify our methodology, rather than developing superior weapons, we focused on developing superior understanding of how existing weapons function. Your technologies are quite impressive, but they weren't designed with adequate security protocols against comprehensive analysis." The tactical display showed results that would have been hilarious if they hadn't been happening to vessels under his command. The dreadnought Inevitable Victory had begun broadcasting its complete technical specifications to anyone within 3-star systems, apparently under the impression that transparency was the foundation of healthy interstellar relationships. The battle cruiser Decisive Authority's navigation computer had plotted a course directly into the nearest star, while helpfully calculating the precise trajectory required for maximum dramatic effect. Most disturbing of all, the weapons platform, argumentative statement had begun composing what appeared to be apologetic poetry in the direction of nearby neutral systems, each verse a masterpiece of remorseful verse dedicated to the philosophical implications of aggressive foreign policy. "This is impossible," muttered the Zelthani delegate, whose crystalline structure was resonating with frequencies that roughly translated to existential confusion. "Our encryption protocols are based on mathematical principles that require quintuple redundant quantum processing to decode. No primitive species should possess the computational capacity to even attempt analysis, let alone successful infiltration." The human response carried what might have been gentle amusement, though it was difficult to be certain when dealing with a species that had just demonstrated the ability to rewrite reality's operating instructions. "Your encryption is indeed mathematically sophisticated. However, you designed it to resist brute force attacks from civilizations with similar technological foundations. We took a different approach. Rather than trying to break your security, we simply built better security and asked your systems if they wanted an upgrade." Most of them were quite enthusiastic about the opportunity for professional development. The implications of this statement settled over the bridge with the weight of a collapsing paradigm. The humans hadn't overwhelmed hegemony defenses, they had convinced them to voluntarily improve themselves out of existence. It was the sort of solution that could only be conceived by a species whose approach to problem solving apparently operated on principles that the rest of the galaxy had never considered. How many ships? Admiral Vexthak asked, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose worldview had just been subjected to unauthorized renovation. Sir, his aide responded, though the question was really directed at the universe in general. How many ships do we have left under our own control? The aide consulted displays that were providing information, with the enthusiastic helpfulness of systems that had apparently been waiting their entire operational lives for the opportunity to be completely honest about their capability. 14 vessels maintain nominal command authority, sir. The remainder appear to be exploring alternative operational parameters, what the aide diplomatically termed alternative operational parameters, included the heavy cruiser Unquestionable Logic, which had begun broadcasting detailed analyses of the moral implications of the hegemony's foreign policy to every inhabited system within communication range. The destroyer Absolute Certainty was currently engaged in what appeared to be philosophical discussions with local wildlife on 3 different planets, having apparently developed sudden interest in comparative xenobiology. The human vessel, meanwhile, continued floating serenely in the center of what had once been the galaxy's most formidable military formation, and was now something resembling a support group for technology experiencing existential awakening. We appreciate your patience during this demonstration, came the next transmission. To address your earlier concerns about human territorial claims, our 17 colonies are staffed by individuals who specialize in understanding and improving existing systems. When we encountered abandoned or failing infrastructure in various systems, we provided technical assistance. The resulting improvements were sufficiently appreciated that local governments requested permanent human presence. The revelation struck Admiral Vexthak as the final piece of a cosmic puzzle, whose picture had been upside down the entire time. The humans weren't primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. They were the cleanup crew that everyone else had somehow failed to notice. While the hegemony had been focused on building bigger weapons and more impressive bureaucracies, humans had been quietly fixing the galaxy's technical problems and earning the sort of genuine gratitude that couldn't be maintained through intimidation. Sir, his aide reported, we're receiving surrender requests from 43 hegemony vessels. They appear to be asking the human ship for instruction on proper diplomatic protocols for requesting technological assistance. The final transmission from the human vessel carried the sort of professional courtesy typically associated with individuals who had just completed a particularly challenging consulting project.
The Hegemony 5th Armada has been successfully upgraded to current operational standards. All vessels now feature improved efficiency ratings, enhanced crew safety protocols, and expanded diplomatic communication capabilities. We've also taken the liberty of installing updated navigation systems that include comprehensive databases of neutral systems suitable for peaceful resettlement. The pause that followed seemed to stretch across the entire star system, as if the universe itself was taking a moment to appreciate the elegant simplicity of the evening's lesson. Regarding our original diplomatic proposal, we're prepared to extend technical assistance agreements to any hegemony territories interested in infrastructure improvement. Our fees are quite reasonable, and we offer comprehensive warranties on all modifications. We've found that most civilizations prefer the voluntary upgrade approach to the alternative. Admiral Vexthak looked around his bridge, noting the expressions of his crew members as they processed the fact that their 3,000-year-old empire had just been politely but thoroughly dismantled by a species whose greatest weapon appeared to be customer service. The hegemony had spent millennia teaching the galaxy to fear them. In 47 minutes, the humans had taught the galaxy something infinitely more dangerous, that there were better ways to solve problems than simply threatening to make them disappear. As distress signals began arriving from hegemony territories across known space, each one reporting the sudden appearance of helpful human technical assistance teams, the Admiral realized that the galaxy was about to discover what happened when the new management actually knew how to manage. The universe, it seemed, had been waiting quite some time for competent administration, and it had apparently decided that humans were exactly the sort of middle management that could finally get things running properly. The cosmic joke, as it turned out, wasn't that the primitives had won. It was that they had never been primitives at all. They had just been working in a different department the whole time.